known. Escobar was to cocaine what Ford was to automobiles.
And more than any other man, he brought cocaine to America. Tonight on Frontline, the godfather of cocaine.
Funding for Frontline is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by annual financial support from viewers like you. This is Frontline.
Thunderstorms roll down from the Andes, but they still come to the cemetery in Medellin. They are retired school teachers, come to honor a man killed by the police in December 1993. They believe he was the innocent victim of political persecution and police brutality. They come and pray for the man and for his mother.
I think of the ingratitude of people. I think of the brutal persecution that was inflicted on him. He was just a man.
When the teachers leave, two men with scarred faces appear and knock on the grave for luck. They seek the blessing of El Patron, the boss of the Medellin cocaine cartel, Pablo Escobar. The story of Pablo Escobar is the story of the modern cocaine industry.
Escobar was to cocaine what Ford was to automobiles.
Compared to Capone and Trafficante and Lansky, this guy was way over them, head and shoulders.
Escobar started the cocaine shipments. He started the international transportation.
He organized the drug industry to a point where it was an equal of some of our leading legitimate corporations anywhere in the world.
Escobar is probably the head of the largest criminal organization the world's ever known.
Few men have ever testified against Escobar and lived. The most important is Max Mermelstein. Today there's a contract on his life, and he appears here in disguise.
I was the only American that ever sat on the council of the Medellin cartel. Living undercover and wearing disguises is necessary. There's still an in effect $3 million contract on my head. I personally am responsible for bringing 56 tons of cocaine into the United States, shipped out $300 million of their profits. I also paid out over $100 million in their expenses here in the United States. And when I decided to cooperate with the government, Escobar wanted me dead.
In the basement of Colombia's old National Police headquarters, a strange museum preserves the memory of Pablo Escobar. Wax dummies illustrate the life of a man once elected to the National Assembly. But Escobar aimed for the president's palace. For years, no government could stop him. No prison could hold him. Before he was killed at age 44, Escobar had amassed a personal fortune of $3 billion. He was perhaps the most successful criminal in history.
¿Qué fue don Pablo Escobar? Un hombre por el que me alegro. y que nació en el Taulazo, una vereda de Río Negro.
But in his hometown, the narco-trafficker is still a folk hero.
Y qué bueno es uno hablar del señor Pablo Escobar. El señor Pablo Escobar.
Here, Senior Pablo Escobar is Robin Hood.
Conocido en el mundo por un narcotraficante.
Pablo Escobar was born in 1949, the son of a peasant farmer and a local school teacher.
El niño se me perdió de la casa cuando tenía aproximadamente 2 años. Estaba muy chiquito.
One day, when he was 2 years old, he wandered away from the house. He was very little, and I found him next to a tree. He had a little stick, and he was playing with a snake. And he was saying, "See? I'm not hurting you." I think he was very sweet and he loved animals.
When Pablo was 2, his mother left her husband on the farm and went to teach in a city school. Escobar grew up in Envigado, a suburb of the city of Medellin. The people of Medellin have a reputation for working hard, making money, and getting ahead. Pablo was a happy child who loved soccer. At home, the atmosphere was heavily religious.
We have a Christ in the bedroom. It's sad because you can see his blood and it looks real. The bruises and everything the Jews did to him. I taught the children about all that when they were very little. This made him very sad. Once I served lunch and Pablo put a piece of meat in his corn cake. The corn cake is typical of our province. And he went and said, "Poor man, who made you bleed? Do you want a little meat?" This shows that he was very religious and very kind.
Escobar was growing up at a violent time in Colombia's violent history. It was a time when 300,000 people were killed.
Colombia went through a period called La Violencia, the violence in which 2 political parties waged war for close to 40 years.
The legacy of La Violencia is long-simmering guerrilla war. Marxist insurgents control large parts of the country. Almost every day there are clashes with the security forces.
I don't think I've ever been in a place where so many people are so heavily armed and so quick to show you that they're heavily armed.
In Colombia, rich children don't brag about a parent's car, but the number of their bodyguards.
The sense of menace and fear one has is being in a country that has one of the world's highest, if not the highest, murder rate. This is a country with a history of violence where people are armed, where there's an expectation of a short and brutal life.
In Medellin, there's a shrine where paid killers come to light a candle before going to work. In a city of 2 million people, there are 4 murders a day. And this is where Escobar grew up. As a teenager, Escobar was expelled from school and drifted into petty crime. Police have few details about his early career.
De Pablo Escobar son muchas las historias que existen. En especial se habla...
There are all kinds of stories about Pablo Escobar. The most common is that he started out by stealing tombstones. At that time, it was easy to make money from tombstones.
It was a simple scam. Escobar stole tombstones from local cemeteries. After shaving off the epitaphs, he sold them as new. His first recorded arrest was in 1974, when he was suspected of stealing a red Renault.
In a number of the conversations that I've had with Pablo, He'd go back into his early days as to when he was stealing cars for a living, and from stealing cars, how he graduated into taking contracts to killing people. He started killing people in his late teens, 18, 19, somewhere in that vicinity. It was on contract, it was for salary. It wasn't because of meanness or anything like that at the time.
It was his elder cousin Gustavo Gaviria, seen here in his trademark flat hat, who introduced Escobar to drug smuggling.
People of Medellin grew up in the smuggling business. Coffee, electrodomestic items, whatever had to be brought in and out of the country. Smuggling was their livelihood growing up through the years. Cocaine became fashionable and they picked up on it right away.
In the U.S., law enforcement was still concentrating on marijuana and heroin.
Nixon had his war on drugs, Ford did, Mr. Carter did, but tended to focus so much on Mexico.
By focusing on marijuana and heroin from Mexico, the Drug Enforcement Administration created a gap in the market for cocaine from Colombia.
Colombia did not solicit the nefarious distinction of being the drug capital of Western Hemisphere. It came about by a combination of rather curious circumstances. In the sense that, first of all, is that the Mexicans were very, very successful in the mid-1970s against both marijuana and Mexican brown heroin. And the drug traffickers, began to look for someplace else. And they wanted a nation which, first of all, was in relatively close flying distance to the United States. So it all came together in Colombia.
Escobar got his start driving coca paste from the Andean mountains to the laboratories in Medellin. He used to race his cousin to get there first. The winner pocketed all the proceeds. He was caught once with 39 kilos of cocaine. But the charges were dropped on a technicality. So at the age of 26, Pablo Escobar made the transition from courier to smuggler. With the street value of cocaine worth $35,000 a kilo, a small plane could make big money. Escobar's flight coordinator was to be Max Mermelstein.
75, 76, 77. It was just in its infancy. Within a matter of a few flights, the man was a multimillionaire. And the monies were invested, land was purchased.
Before he was 30, he bought Hacienda Nápoles for a reported $63 million. He owned his own helicopter and a private zoo and thousands of acres. He hired a professional cameraman to shoot his home movies. He and his men posed in front of his proudest possession, a car that had once belonged to the gangster Al Capone. He saw himself as a future Al Capone. Alcohol was once illegal, just like cocaine today. In less than 5 years, he had gone from car thief to multimillionaire. But as a drug smuggler, Escobar still had a long way to go.
In the late 70s, there was a group of independent cowboys dealing in narcotics. By that I mean that they were getting their own dope, they were processing it by themselves, transporting it, and trying to find buyers here in the U.S.
After Pablo did his own first flight into the United States, in order to brag about it and show everybody how big a man Pablo was, he actually decommissioned the plane and had it mounted above the entryway to his farm. So everybody in the world can see that Pablo Escobar is flying cocaine into the United States.
American drug pilots who landed at Escobar's hacienda were impressed by the grip he kept on his people and his organization.
The time that I met him, he was in total control. You got the impression that he was always thinking about what to do next or what to say next, and the people that were working for him, every move that he made, every one of them would watch him. We met at a hacienda in Colombia, and he rolled out the red carpet. He was very interested in making our stay as comfortable as possible and very intent on assuring us that if we stayed together, not only would our operations improve each time, we could have a long and prosperous association.
The man at the controls of this plane says he flew 20 trips for Escobar.
Pablo Escobar's outfit was probably the most efficient of all the groups that we worked for. The merchandise was always on time. We would take off at normally twice the gross weight of the airplane. For the first couple of hours until you burned some of that fuel out, you were flying bomb. Any turbulence at all would create an accelerated stall. You had to stay out of thunderstorms if you were fortunate enough to be able to do that. If you were not, you didn't make it. There were a lot of people that didn't make it.
Pilots who did make it could earn $1 million a flight.
You have to look at the pilots that were arrested in Florida. Most of them were arrested on their 28th or their 32nd trip.
One crew that did 38 flights over a 6-month period of time. Every one of them came through.
When in 1979, Pablo Escobar struck up a partnership with Carlos Lehder, it was a significant milestone in the history of the cocaine industry. It was Lehder who persuaded Escobar to begin using bigger planes to shift bigger cargoes of drugs. To avoid American airspace, they flew to the Bahamas, where the cocaine cargo could be broken up into smaller parcels and smuggled into the U.S. It was in the Bahamas that they encountered Robert Vesco.
Robert Vesco was one of the first world-class criminals who understood moving money and understood the industrialization of crime. Vesco is the person who taught Lehder that doing cocaine smuggling on a flight at a time was not a good idea.
So Escobar and Lehder purchased an island off the Bahamas called Norman's Key.
They would fly large plane loads of cocaine to Norman's Key, store it in a refrigerated warehouse, and then use small planes to transship it all over the United States. It was a kind of Federal Express operation for the delivery of cocaine.
They were making so much money that they could afford to lose planes. The drug planes had to run the gauntlet of U.S. Customs, who had planes of their own. These came equipped with FLIR, forward-looking infrared radar. FLIR gave its operators a technical edge, but only 1 in 100 was even detected.
Just ever so slightly to the right, just look at the same value. Yeah, it sure does.
Escobar's planes were smuggling about 400 kilos of cocaine a trip. One flight could net $10 million. The bales of cocaine were offloaded at remote airstrips or dropped into the water. High-speed motorboats made the final run.
Miami was kind of Wild West because it was the point of entry for so much of the cocaine. So you'd have great chases across Biscayne Bay and cigarette boats with customs right behind them.
As in the days of Prohibition, fashionable opinion was on the side of the smugglers. Cocaine was widely believed to be non-addictive.
It was a harmless vice as far as we were concerned. And the demand in the United States was so great that we just couldn't get it up fast enough. It wound up being the fashionable drug in the early 80s. lawyers' offices, judges' chambers, movie stars, you name it. The upper echelon, cocaine was the way to go.
At the age of 32, Escobar was earning $500,000 a day. But he had serious competition in Medellin. The biggest smugglers were the three Ochoa brothers. This restaurant is owned by their father. His 4-year-old daughter is its star attraction. Outside, the head of the family, Don Fabio Ochoa, sits beneath a sign that says, "Please don't shake my hand. Thank you." There was also Jose Rodriguez Gacha, alias El Mexicano, a gangster with an appetite for extreme violence. And though Carlos later was now addicted to his own product, he was still bringing plenty of merchandise to market. In 1981, the question for Pablo Escobar and his rivals was whether to compete or cooperate.
What these people were a kind of loose grouping of business organizations, the Ochoa organization, the Escobar organization. And these different organizations began to work together cooperatively.
We were bringing in 400, 450, sometimes 500 kilos on a shipment. And if it all belonged to one person, and we did take a loss, it would be a bad hit. It would hurt.
They then began to mix shipments. So if there were 3 groups in one shipment, each group would lose a third of the shipment. And it spread the risk, it diversified things.
And put all together, they made this a major industry as opposed to individual cowboys who were trying to do the business by themselves.
Escobar and his new partners came to be known as the Medellin Cartel. The cartel divided up the U.S. market with its competitors from the Colombian city of Cali.
The Cali folks operated primarily out of New York, whereas the Medellin people operated in Miami, and they made a division out in Los Angeles between the two.
Soon, the Medellin cartel was running 5 flights a week into the U.S., and Escobar would be making $1 million a day.
The average person can appreciate how rapidly the money was made. But it was not unusual for $12 and $13 million to be transported back and forth in private jet planes.
They're smiling at us. And if you had $250,000 in your pocket, wouldn't you be smiling too?
The money was rolling in so fast and became such a problem because of its volume and bulk that just to make things go faster, we used to weigh it, quick estimate. We'd separate everything in its own denominations. And one bill, U.S. currency, is approximately a gram. So we just package it up, weigh it, get a quick estimate of what we had, and when we had time later, we'd count it.
They saw themselves as involved in nothing illegal. They were involved in a business, and they compared themselves to the Kennedys, like in the Scotch business during the time of Prohibition. One day it'll be legal, then our money will be legitimatized, and we'll be famous like they are.
Escobar and his partners were getting noticed. In Colombia, the rich are always at risk from kidnappers. In 1981, one of Don Fabio Ochoa's older daughters was kidnapped by urban guerrillas.
The cartel members all got together to get her release from the leftist guerrillas in Colombia.
The terrorists were terrorized. The kidnappers found themselves being hunted down by a death squad called MAS.
The initials MAS stand for Muerte a los Secuestradores. In English would be death to kidnappers. It was established late 1981, December of 81, after one of the Ochoa sisters was kidnapped.
The kidnappers were assassinated by the traffickers. In some instances, they were turned over to authorities, and it was effective.
Pablo basically took control of MAS. MAS was in excess of 2,000 men, all of them ready to kill somebody on his orders. And with MAS, he now had more control than any of the other cartel members.
There was no shortage of killers in a city like Medellin. The trademark of Escobar's hitmen was a snub-nosed machine gun fired from the back of a motorbike. Young thugs with street names like Rene, Mugre, La Kika, and Zarco became valued employees in Escobar's multi-million-dollar business.
He reached the top of his business by making it clear to everyone that if he was crossed, they were going to suffer a violent penalty for having crossed him.
Violence was a trademark of the Medellin cartel, and extraordinary violence was their special trademark.
To Escobar, it didn't matter whether you're a man, woman, or a child. If you're going to die, you're going to die. If he had to kill the father, he'd kill the whole family.
Mother, father, cousin, nephew, niece, children, grandchildren, you name it, all dead.
What set Escobar apart from other cocaine smugglers was not just ruthlessness, but an ability to think strategically.
Whenever Pablo Escobar was thinking of something big, he would put little bits of paper in his mouth. It showed he was up to something, a murder, a kidnapping, or a business deal. When something was cooking, he would go. That's what he did when he had to take a big decision.
At the same time, he was a devoted husband and father who would interrupt any business meeting if his small son or daughter demanded his attention.
An intercepted conversation was obtained by the Colombian National Police between Pablo Escobar and I believe it was his wife. And in the background, while he was talking to his wife about family matters and things like that, everyday living type matters, screaming could be heard in the background. And during this conversation, Pablo put his hand over the receiver and turned around and asked whoever was committing this torture to please keep the guy quiet, that he was trying to talk to his family on the phone.
Don Fabio Ochoa once said, he was a man who would be a terrible enemy and a wonderful friend. He was a man of extremes and prone to violence.
We know that he ordered, for example, the eyes of some people to be taken with what they call the hot spoon, which consisted just with a spoon to take out the eyes of a living person.
Popeye, who was one of Pablo's most trusted sicarios, one of his assassins, one of Popeye's favorite forms of torture was to heat a spike or a large nail and then drive it into the victim's head until it reached their brain and killed them.
A man is tied to a tree with barbed wire, and the Colombian people got his family on a cellular telephone and got him to say hello and explain what his situation was, and then as they listened, utterly horrified, tortured him to death.
Now in prison and blinded by a letter bomb, Escobar's brother managed the finances. Roberto won't hear a bad word about Pablo.
A él lo llamaban el patrón.
They call him El Patron, the boss, because in Colombia, people who own a company are called patrones.
O propietarias de una empresa les dicen patrones. Entonces,
and the poor people began to call him El Patron because he would bring 2 or 3 trucks to the poor barriers, and he'd distribute food to people who didn't have any.
Comida les repartía para que tuvieran una mejor forma de alimentarse.
Escobar's image as a modern Robin Hood was born in the slums that surround Medellin. There is a place here known as Barrio Pablo Escobar. They still say masses for Escobar's soul in the church which he built here. Music from the steeple drifts over 200 homes which Escobar built for the poor. People here prefer to forget Escobar's violent reputation. Two of the first people to be rehoused by Escobar were Mr. and Mrs. Flores. Before then, they were so-called throwaway people who lived in a city garbage dump. Next to a burning candle and crucifix, they keep a picture of Pablo Escobar. Mrs. Flores says he is going to be the next saint.
He was a good man, an intelligent man, very kind to the poor.
He built a soccer field and he sponsored the soccer team. He did a lot in order to help the poor. And he hired the local people in order to do construction, to run businesses for him, to teach in the local schools, which he built. He did a lot of good, much more than the local government, than the Colombian government did.
Proud of his good works, Escobar commissioned a painting to celebrate his gifts to the people and city of Medellin.
Pablo Escobar was a great megalomaniac. He liked to make his power felt, and he enjoyed it. His whole life was a display of power.
When you have your own fleet of airplanes, when you have your own zoo, and when you have your own stash of gold bullion, the next logical step is political power. It's true in this country, it's true in Colombia, and it was certainly true in the case of Pablo Escobar.
Escobar had created a power base for himself in the barrios of Medellin. He decided to run for office and entered himself as a candidate in the congressional elections. In 1982, Escobar was elected as a member of Congress. In one sense, he was no stranger to politics or politicians.
There was a basic competitive nature amongst all of the heads of the cartel, not only in how much coke they could ship, but it was a game between them as to who could buy the most and the heaviest duty politicians.
For the next 10 years, Escobar could afford to buy almost anyone he wanted. Here, a hidden camera shows a Medellin cartel lawyer delivering a payoff to a politician.
They offer a lot of money. If politicians didn't accept the money, they say, I'm going to kill you. So what do you prefer? You prefer money or you prefer to be killed?
Alberto Villamizar was one who was threatened.
Alberto, you are my friend. Don't fight again. It's impossible. They are very powerful. You have wife, you have a child.
And these colleagues were congressmen?
Yes, of course.
From?
Well, politicians who used to work with the Medellin cartel.
The new ambassador at the American embassy found it difficult to get the government of Colombia to care about a trade that was doing so much for the country's balance of payments.
When I was ambassador down there, basically the Colombians felt that it was not a Colombian problem. First of all, is that they didn't use it. It basically was going to the consumers in the United States. They were making money, and it was a U.S. problem, not a Colombian problem.
One of the few Colombian politicians to take a hard line against drugs was the Minister of Justice, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla. But he was attacked as a puppet of the gringos by Escobar and his political allies.
But there was a political dimension which can be described, I think, as Hispanidad, which means Spanishness against the Anglo-Saxons or anybody else. One of the main pitches to gain popularity with the Colombian people was to say that the cocaine is a third world atomic bomb against the imperialists, right? And basically the idea is to destroy, as they would put it, imperialism from within by its own excesses. Because the fact is, if our people did not consume this, they would not produce it. That's just the reality of the equations of the free market, right?
Escobar was still not even a target of American law enforcement when he posed for this picture. But in 1982, there was a significant shift of policy inside the White House.
My very reason for being here this afternoon is not to announce another short-term government offensive, but to call instead for a national crusade against drugs, a sustained, relentless effort to rid America of this scourge by mobilizing every segment of our society against drug abuse.
The DEA made cocaine a higher priority and began monitoring ether factories. And that's how it learned that a Colombian working for Escobar and the cartel wanted to buy a huge amount of ether and was willing to pay cash.
Ether at the time was extremely important to the manufacturing of cocaine simply because it's one of the basic ingredients for the traditional method and formula for processing coca paste to coca hydrochloride.
The Colombian buyer was in the market for 1,300 barrels of ether. He was told to try Elk Grove Industrial Park near Chicago's O'Hare Airport. From a nondescript building here, Mel Shabilian and his partner Harry Fullett were in the business of selling ether. But Harry and Mel were not all they seemed. They were, in fact, DEA agents running a sophisticated sting operation.
We purported ourselves to be brokers for ether, and told him that we would be willing to assist him in spending his $400,000 cash that he had with him.
Came to our store and paid us $15,000 as a down payment to begin the 1,355-gallon drum order.
Before the first 76 barrels of ether left for Colombia, DEA technicians cut two open and concealed battery-powered transponders inside. Escobar had no idea that when the ether left the plant, it could be traced all the way to Colombia. Signals from the transponders were being picked up by a spy satellite and relayed down to a monitoring station in El Paso.
Well, initially they left Tuscola and went down through Louisiana through the port of New Orleans.